Morning, Bob. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Bernard. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And welcome to everybody who is tuned in with us this morning. It's Bernard Nomberg. This is another episode of Nomberg Law Live, and we are hopefully going to make through this session without getting bumped off with the crazy weather that we've got going on. And I'm very pleased. I've got my friend author and attorney Robert Bailey online with me this morning. How's your weather up there in Huntsville?
It's a little bit soggy, a little wet. I think probably going to rain most of the day. At least that's the forecast. So it's raining now.
Yeah, those folks who are down in the Gulf, hopefully they've seen the last of I guess it's Alberto weather, and I guess it's headed north. But I appreciate you giving me a few minutes this morning, and hopefully we won't get knocked offline. But for those of you
Absolutely.
just joining us, uh, this is our Tuesday at 10 o'clock sessions on Nomberg Law Live. I've got my friend, attorney, and author Robert Bailey from Huntsville. Bob, I appreciate you being here this morning, and I'm very excited for us to talk about Professor McMurtry and his latest, what he's gotten into lately. For those of you who don't know, Bob, tell us. I know you're a practicing lawyer in Huntsville. Where do you do, and what practice are you with?
Well, I practice with the law firm of Lanier Ford Shaver and Payne, and I've been practicing here in Huntsville for about 18 and a half years. Primarily do insurance defense work, mostly medical malpractice cases from the defense side, and that's pretty much what I've done throughout my career. I do some premises liability cases from the defense side, and but that's probably 95% of what I do.
Very good. And I've always heard the adage that rock stars want to be athletes, athletes want to be rock stars. And I think this analogy may hold. Lawyers want to be authors. Now, I don't know if it goes the other way. I don't know if authors necessarily want to be lawyers, but it seems like in most attorneys, there is an author just waiting to be found. And it seems like you have found your pen. And how did you get into that? How did it ultimately break? How did you break away, or how do you balance being a full-time attorney, a full-time dad, full-time father, husband, and now author?
Well, I think it probably starts with just the reason I went to law school. You know, I went to Davidson College in North Carolina, and I figured out I wanted to go to law school during that time frame, and that was right around the time John Grisham was getting big. You know, his first five books had come out, and which I loved. All those books are so good, and then you know, in high school, late in high school, I'd read To Kill a Mockingbird, so I was kind of you read those books and you're inspired sort of to be both a lawyer and a writer. And I think I took some creative writing classes at Davidson my senior year. I had some electives to burn, and I wanted to see if I could do it or not. And those stories were fun to write. Looking back on them now, they're pretty bad. But it was a good experience for me. I got enough good comments to think maybe I had some talent for it. And then when I went to law school at Alabama, I remember being in class one day and thinking about it was a very smart aleck daydream at the time, but you know what would happen if this law professor actually had to try a case, and that sort of spawned the idea for the professor, which I started writing about a year or two after I got out of school.
And so, how long from when you first started writing about the professor until you got your first book published? How long was that?
I think it took about 8 years all told. You know, I wrote two complete drafts of the professor that were 800 pages long, which nobody
Oh,
would have
wow.
read. And you know, you learn a lot as you write, and I guess I learned a lot during the process of it. You know, I quickly learned that no publisher is going to buy an 800-page book unless your name's Stephen King, and so when I sent out 5 emails trying to get published about 3 or 4 years out, and got immediate rejections because the book was too long. And so I was pretty disappointed by that and sort of set the professor aside for a little while and started working on a new idea I had about an African American lawyer in Pulaski that is trying to avenge the murder of his father by the Ku Klux Klan. And that book, in my mind, was going to be called Between Black and White. And I finished writing it, and it was too long too. It was like 600 or 700 pages. It took me a year and a half to do it, and I knew it was too long. But I had to get to the end and finish it. And when I did, I knew that story needed to be fixed, but I also knew I had a really good character in Bo Cephas Haynes. And so I went back to my story of the professor and tried to figure out a way I could put Bo into the professor. And when I figured that out, the redemption storyline of the professor really came into view for me. It really made everything work. The book went from 800 pages to about 450, which is still a little too long, but in the wheelhouse. And so I went back and tried to get published again. I sent query letters out to literally the same 5 agents that had rejected me immediately a couple years earlier, and 3 of them asked to read it. And so I knew at that point maybe we were onto something. And then the process kind of started from there. It took me about 8 months to get an agent. I queried 100 agents, 30 asked to read it, and I ended up getting a deal with Liza Fleisig in New York, who is just this fantastic agent. She used to be a lawyer herself. And when you get an agent who represents you as an author, it's kind of like having a plaintiff's lawyer take your case. I mean, they don't make any money unless they sell your book, so it was a real confidence builder for me. And my book has a lot of Southern stuff in it, a lot of Alabama football references. It's not a football book, but it's got some of that flavor to it. And Liza didn't know anything about that. I mean, she just liked the story. And so that was a huge confidence builder for me. And once she took over, you know, she sent it out to publishers, and that process took not a whole year, but almost a year. She got me read by a lot of big houses, and we got read by Little Brown and Random House, and we got really close with the editor for the book The Lovely Bones. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book, but it's a huge book a few years ago. And we kept getting rejections, and you hear the word no a lot on the process. But along the way, we had 2 really big breaks. The first break didn't seem like one at the time, but one of the publishers who said no actually gave some feedback, which is pretty rare. Normally they just say no. But this guy was really specific with his criticism, and a few of the things he said really I thought rang true. You know, one of the things was, you know, the book is a Southern legal thriller, and so, you know, you need to own that. And so, you know, it looks like you could make the book more Southern, sweeten the tea, so to speak. And so another thing was it was still too long. You need to cut 50 pages. I don't care how you do it. And he was right about that. And so I think the last thing was the villain and the professor needed a little bit more of motivation to do what he did. And that I made an edit with that in that regard that I thought helped the book. So anyway, I took those suggestions, spent 45 days editing the book, and sent it back to him. And of course, you know, he still said no. He said it's much better, but we don't want it. But in our next group of submissions, we got our offer. And so it always makes me think about 2 things. You know, what would have happened if we'd have gone out with that version originally? And then it makes me grateful for the advice when it came. The other big break is that my agent asked me to go out and get some blurbs, you know, blurbs from other writers, you know, people that everybody would know. And that was a fun process. And I sent emails to a lot of my heroes like Michael Connolly and John Sanford and Brad Meltzer. And most of them responded, and they all said no, or most of them did, but they were real nice about it. But one guy said yes, and it was Winston Groom in Fairhope. Winston said he'd love to read it, and he did. He gave me a blurb about a week later, and that blurb that he gave me dons the cover of The Professor. So I think the combination of those 2 things happening around the same time really sent us over the edge and got us published.
Wow, very good. Well, thank you for sharing that backdrop to us. Most of us who aren't authors have no idea how frustrating it can be, how many rejections that you get. You just need that one to say yes. And for those of you just joining us, good morning. This is Nomberg Law Live. I'm Bernard. I'm here with with Huntsville, Alabama attorney and author Robert Bailey. We're talking about Robert's legal career and writing career and how he got started writing his Professor McMurtry series that's been so wildly popular. For those of you who may have seen the AL.com article a few weeks ago, high praise, Bob, being noted as the Alabama's John Grisham. And I know that folks, if you're a lawyer or even if you're not and you like legal thrillers, at least this article has kind of put you in some high praise. And I personally think that it's duly warranted. I hope that you have found it to be as helpful and for your publishing, promoting the books.
Oh, that's been great. Shelley Haskins interviewed me for that article and really did a great job with it. And it really came at a good time right before the last trial came out. And anytime you write legal thrillers and you get compared in any way to John Grisham, that's a huge honor. I'm very humbled by it because Grisham is one of my heroes and probably wouldn't be doing this if he hadn't done what he did. I think he probably launched a lot of lawyers into trying to write their book. And so, John Grisham, Scott Turow, some of those guys that really came out in the 80s and early 90s with their books really spawned a lot of other great writers. And
Absolutely.
So any comparison to Grisham for me is I'm honored by it.
Certainly. Well, let's talk about Professor McMurtry and Bocephus and some of these characters. I know that there has to be stories from your background, people in your life that must have been some influences to help shape up some of these characters. You want to share a little bit about that?
Oh, sure, absolutely. The professor character is really probably inspired by a number of people in my life. The personal aspects of the man are really inspired by my dad. The Professor McMurtry's from Hazel Green. He loves bulldogs. Some of his mannerisms, the way he talks, very much inspired by my father, and people in my family immediately pick up on that, and so it's kind of an Easter egg for them. But of course, there's other aspects of the character. I went to law school at Alabama, and I had Dean Gamble for evidence, and Dean Charles Gamble really did write the book on evidence in the state of Alabama with McElroy's evidence book, and which most of us have in our offices, and I'm sure, yeah.
I was going to say,
there it is, right? Exactly. So, I had Dean Gamble, and the classroom scene in The Professor very much, the first time you see him as a teacher is very much inspired by being in Dean Gamble's classroom and just the authority that he had. Such a great teacher, man. And then the third aspect of the professor's character just comes from the Alabama football folklore. I grew up with that as my background. My dad told me stories about Billy Neighbors and Leroy Jordan and Darwin Holt and Benny Nelson, just like they were, the Avengers. So, you grow up with those guys as your heroes, and it really does form a lot of the basis for the story. I wanted my character to be legendary in the state of Alabama, and the best way to do that is to put him on one of Coach Bryant's teams, and so it was a natural for me. As far as some of the other characters, Rick Drake, I started writing this book when I was a young lawyer. I'm not a young lawyer anymore, but I was when I first started, and so the Rick Drake character is probably inspired a lot by me and just all young lawyers. When you're young, you make mistakes. You need help, you need a mentor, and Rick has some talent, but he really, at least in The Professor, really needs some help. And he grows over the course of the series. That's one of the fun parts about writing a series of books is the characters change and they develop, and he's kind of a work in progress. The character of Bocephus Haynes is probably most special to me because he's so fictional. It's truly just a figment of my imagination. I came up with that character, and he really helped me write both The Professor and Between Black and White, and so he holds a special place for me. And it's fun to just make things up. When you write stories, probably the most fun you have is when you're just making it up as you go. And a lot of Bo's story is me having the most fun that I've had as a writer. And so So that's very cool for me. And then, and you know this, Bernard, when you practice law, one of the best things about practicing law is all the characters you meet along the way. And so many characters in my books are inspired by people along the way that I've met. Maybe not completely, but just things they say. Certainly, the character of Powell Conrad is inspired by my best friend from law school, whose name was Will Powell, and who's a judge now over in Lauderdale County. And so, it's fun to, base characters or have characters inspired by people from real life. The character of Ray Ray Piccolo in Between Black and White is kind of just inspired by, you know, as a lawyer and you try cases, you always want that local counsel that kind of knows everything, knows where the bodies are buried and where the skeletons are. And Ray Ray is that guy. He knows everybody, and it's important to be able to pick a jury and have that person. And of course, in that story, Ray Ray has more to do than just pick a jury, but that was a fun character to develop. So to me, probably the most fun about writing, I think every writer's different, and for me, creating the characters and their backstories and how they develop is probably the most fun I have.
Well, it shows, Bob. It really does with each of these characters as I'm reading through the books, and I always get a little bit upset that it only takes me about a day or two to plow through the books because I'm enjoying them so much. Maybe I need to go back and get your old 800-page manuscripts, the original writings. But I may have shared with you the other day that I read the most recent book, the Last Trial. It only took me 2 days to read it, and I've already re-listened to it on Audible during my drive. So it has been thoroughly entertaining, and I appreciate that you have put such emphasis to detail. And what I mean by that is anybody who has lived any time in the state of Alabama will recognize all of these landmark locations from Huntsville to down to the Panhandle, Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, you name it. You really have got some great touches in there. So that's a fun part of the read as well.
Thank you. I love, I've always loved reading books that have Easter eggs in them for folks, where, if you read Grisham's book, The Firm, when Mitch McDear is down on the Panhandle and he stops the Floribama, and you're like, well, I've been there before. And so I like putting things in books like that so that there's a connection with the reader so they can see the place. And I think it makes it more personal for them, and it makes it more personal for me. I get a kick out of that. So if I can include a real place that I've been that maybe has special meaning for me, then maybe it's that way for the reader. And so it allows me to connect with the people reading the story.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, while you're writing each of these books in the series, how much do you allow friends or family to actually know what's going on in the story as you're preparing the book, or do you wait until the very end and then they see the final product?
That's a good question. I really try to wait. There are times, though, in each of these books where you get a little stumped as to what you want to do, and or I have. And so occasionally I will talk a point out with my wife. Dixie's always kind of my first reader. And so when I have something that I'm concerned about or I want to just brainstorm, a lot of times I'll say, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? And she knows the characters probably as well as I do by now, and so she has an opinion on that. And I have occasionally done that with my agent, Liza. Liza's very good with these characters. She loves them as much as I do, and so sometimes it's nice to be able to bounce an idea off of them. I'll occasionally let them read the first 50 pages just to kind of see if I'm off to a good start. I've done that with the last two books. I'm glad I did. But that being said, you don't want to have too many cooks in the kitchen. You want to still. Sometimes if I talk too much about it, I get frozen. One of the things that took me a long time with Between Black and White is I talked about it so much in book clubs and stuff that it became harder to write. It sounded so good in my mind, and when I talked about it, but then I got to the computer and I would freeze up. And so it really is important to keep writing while you're talking things out. You don't want to lose the momentum of the story.
Well, for those of you just joining us or will watch this later on, I'm talking with Huntsville, Alabama attorney and author Robert Bailey. Bob has just put out the third book in a series dealing with Professor McMurtry and all of the cast of characters that seem to find some adventures with him. And Bob, I know you're knee deep in the next book. You want to share anything by way of a timetable, a title, any subject, anything you want to share with us about the fourth book that may be coming out pretty soon?
Yeah, the fourth book is already under contract. It's going to come out next April, I think April the 22nd or 23rd. The book's title is The Final Reckoning, and it will be the final book in the McMurtry and Drake saga. The book will, there's a chapter in the last trial where Tom has an encounter at the prison in Tennessee with his nemesis, Jim Bone Wheeler, which will serve as sort of I guess, the starting point for that story. And it really will be sort of the final reckoning for a lot of characters in this series. And I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be a book that is a little bit of a departure from the other three in the sense that there will be a lot of action that takes place out of court. And because of the events of the last trial, and I don't want to give away any spoilers, Rick Drake will be doing a good bit of the legal work in the story. And Tom and Bo and Pal and Rick, they all have to encounter probably their greatest challenge, and this is in the character of somebody who doesn't play by the rules at all and who's coming after them. So it's going to be a fun finale. I hope it will resonate with fans of the series.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to that one. And if you want to send some pages down this way for some input, I'm your guy.
All right.
Not to push you too far ahead of what's next for Bob Bailey, the author, but are there plans for other series, other books, other works that we may be looking forward to?
Well, I'm really excited to share that Thomas and Mercer, my publisher, when they bought the last book, The Final Reckoning, they also bought the first book in a new series. And that book is going to be a kind of a spinoff of the McMurtry series. The title of the first book is going to be called The General, and it will take place in Pulaski, and Bo Cephas Haynes will play a role in it, and it basically will be about the General, Helen Lewis, who was introduced in the first in the last three books of the McMurtry series, and she plays a pretty big role in the Final Reckoning. So I think it'll be a kind of a natural, organic next move for me. There'll be some new characters, but there'll also be some familiar characters to readers. So I hope they'll want to kind of continue, the story with some of these other characters.
Well, that sounds exciting, but I will say this: of all the characters in the first three books, Helen Lewis kind of got my attention the most in that I wanted to sit up a little bit straighter and a little bit scared of what may come next dealing with her. But that does sound exciting. For those of you just tuning in or just with us, I'm talking with attorney and author Robert Bailey. We're talking about his in part his legal career, but we're also mainly talking about his writing and what's going on with the Professor McMurtry series. I will say this, Bob, for all of these books, as I'm reading through them, I'm envisioning who's going to play this character, who's going to play that character, and I'm truly hoping that somewhere in the future that these will be made into movies. Is there anything in the pipeline for that?
Well, that would be okay with me. We have come very close to a TV deal, and I think that I really think that would be fun to do. I think that the books would be kind of a natural for either a TV series or a movie, but it's fun to think about. Like you said, characters, TV, movie stars play in the different characters, and I've had people do write-ups. There's a really nice lady in Moulton named Loretta Gillespie who writes a column for AL.com, and she a couple years ago basically cast everybody in the story, with different actors. So that was fun, and so I think that's the fun part of reading too. Is especially in an age where you have a lot of movies, it's natural to think of certain characters in terms of what movie star would play them. I have I have a Facebook page myself, and a number of readers chime in with who they think would play different characters. I get a lot of Harrison Fords and Tom Sellecks for the professor, and so
Certainly, certainly.
and so it's fun, to think about that. And I would love that one day. We keep our fingers crossed for that. So
Well, that could be great. I don't want to forget mentioning thank you, Dad, for tuning in down in Gulf Shores, and Travis Isom here in town. Travis will be a guest in a couple of weeks talking about his book, The Newspaper Boy. So thank you both for tuning in. And any of you who have any questions for Bob at this point, just go ahead and put them in the comments section. We'll get them to him while we're live, or we'll make sure that he gets them afterward. Bob, I'll make sure that after we finish today, I'll put in the comments section how to get in touch with you, send them to your the author page, as well as the website. I sure appreciate you spending some time with me. One of the things I definitely want to make sure that I ask of you is, if somebody is interested in writing, which a lot of people are, but they don't necessarily know if they want to be an author. They just like to write. It's just something they do for fun. But if they get serious about it and they really have something that they want to say, give us your input. How does someone get started? What are some tips? What are some thoughts? What if they really want to do that? Where should they go?
I think that probably the biggest tip I would give someone is to go ahead and write your story. Writing it is the most important thing. I think there are some good things you can do. The best thing I ever did in terms of getting ready to write my story was reading the book On Writing by Stephen King. Stephen King came out with sort of a memoir, autobiography was part of it, and then the second half of it was sort of a instruction manual in his own words on how to write. And it's just a fantastic read. I mean, it's very entertaining. It's in Stephen King's voice, which, if you like his books, he writes this memoir and this instruction manual just like he writes his stories. They're very entertaining, but very inspiring. And some of the main advice is so simple, but one of his big things is read a lot, write a lot. I mean, if you're gonna write, you really need to read a lot, because reading is it's like listening to music. If you read a lot, there's a beat to a story. And if you've ever read a really good story, there's a beat to that story, kind of internal. And when you finish a chapter, you want to read the next chapter. And so, whatever it takes to do that, I don't think you learn it unless you read a lot, and also unless you practice writing a lot. And so, I think that's probably the best advice. There are a number of publishing references out there, in terms of once you write your story, how to get published. I think Jeff Herman has a guide, Jeff Herman's Guide to Literary Agents, Publishers, etc., which he puts out an edition every 2 or 3 years. That's a good reference, gives you a lot of, names of editors, names of agents. But in terms of just getting over the hump and beginning the process, I think, don't be afraid to write your story. And I think once you start writing, I think the best advice, and again, this comes in Stephen King's book On Writing, but write that first draft fast. Don't get too bogged down with the little stuff. You're gonna write a first draft that's bad. Everybody that's ever written a first draft has written a bad one. It's really impossible to write a perfect first draft. And so what you want to do is not get too tight. Write your story and get to the end. And once you get to the end, you can go back and fix it. And where a lot of the work comes in is in the revision process. But
Sure.
to me, it's really important to not get too tight when you're writing that first draft, because that's the fun part, and that's when you're making it up as you go and trying to get to where you want to get. And so it's really important to write fast and to try to keep the momentum of the story. Write every day if you can, even if it's just a paragraph.
Very good, Bob. I got a couple of questions from Chervis. How
Okay.
how young were you when you started writing, and that eventually led you down this path? And then the second question is, what authors have inspired you?
I was 22 when I first started writing those creative writing stories that I wrote at Davidson, and then I started writing The Professor when I was 25. And in between there, I dabbled with a couple of other stories that I ended up just putting in the drawer. But so I pretty much at the end of college and into law school is when I started writing. Now, I was a big reader before then, and so I think, and I'll share this. I think one of the things that inspired me to write is when anybody, you read To Kill a Mockingbird or The Grapes of Wrath, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's the greatest thing ever. How could I ever write anything like that?
Sure.
I mean, occasionally you're going to read something that you think is not that good, and maybe just doesn't get the details right, or it's boring. And so I read a story like that, and I can't even remember what it was, but I remember thinking afterwards, if this guy can get published, then why not me? And so that was, in a weird way, kind of inspiring. And then in terms of the writers that have inspired me, obviously Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird was a huge inspiration. I loved John Steinbeck when I was in high school. I read all of his classics, Of Mice and Men, The Grapes of Wrath, East of Eden. I think, in terms of contemporary commercial fiction, John Sanford, Stephen King, John Grisham, Greg Iles from Natchez, Mississippi, has been a huge influence for me. I love his books. Those guys. I love Michael Connolly. The Harry Bosch and Lincoln Lawyer series are some of my favorite. I mean, every book he's written, and I think he's well into his 20s now, has just been fantastic to me. Just great follow-ups. And for a series, if you really want to look at a series, it's hard to beat the Bosch series from Connolly and the Lucas Davenport series from John Sanford. And I think when you get into those stories, each story builds on the previous one, but you can also read each story as a standalone. So I think all of those were pretty big influences for me.
Well, reading the Last Trial, you certainly could read that as a standalone, but I highly encourage you read The Professor in black and white as a series. Bob, I sure appreciate your time this morning. This was fantastic. I always enjoy talking with you and learning more about The Professor and what's going on with you. Guys, thank you for joining us today. If you want to reach Bob or have more questions for him, just put them in the comments. We'll put his contact information in there. Thank you again for joining us today. I wish you nothing but the best of luck on those books, and keep them coming.
Thank you, Bernard. It was an honor to be here.
Certainly. Guys, thank you for joining us today on Nomberg Law Live. We'll be back again next week at 10 a.m. Central. Hope you have a dry and productive week. We've got the weather coming through, but hopefully it'll be out of here pretty soon. And have a good week. Take care.
Yeah.